Hi, my name is Ashley Miller, and I am an assistant instructor here at the University of Texas. I also help out with the SPURS program, and I have taught the Rhetoric 306 and 309 classes in the past. And I'm here today to talk with you about how to write and really target your audience when you are writing a persuasive writing assignment. I know that you've done some work already in your class looking at other people's arguments, and you spent a lot of time looking at audience in those arguments. But today we're going to talk specifically about how you can think about audience so that when you write persuasively, you can really be sure that you're targeting that audience and that you're tailoring all of your appeals towards what you already know this audience thinks, feels, and believes. So to do that, the first thing you need to do is select your audience. So you're going to need to pick an audience that you're going to write your argument for, and you want to make sure you're specific about it. An audience of Americans, for example, is far too broad to be effective in persuading them. You need to find a specific focus of a community that you know you can really target and play to their strengths and to their beliefs when you write. So one example of this community might be UT students. It's a much more concentrated student body. There are specific, age groups that you can try to target, and they're, largely college students are pretty liberal thinkers, so there's a lot of ways you can specify that audience. I will encourage you to make sure that once you do select your audience, that you do some research, some really specific hard research to make sure you know precisely what this audience does think and does believe and does care about. You don't want to just sort of think off the top of your head, what do you think that they think and feel and believe and care about? You want to make sure that you're being specific and that you're being accurate so that your argument ends up being successful. What I'd like to do is talk you through the worksheet that your teacher has for you that's titled Practicing Persuasive Writing. And on the first page of this worksheet, the first thing we need to do before you actually begin writing your draft is think about, these things I mentioned just a moment ago. How does your audience feel about, for example, the top 10% rule? How does the audience feel about college admissions? What are your audience's attitudes about the ideas that you're about to talk about? So there are some blanks that you need to fill in here concerning your speech's topic. You need to figure out what sorts of things your audience values. Does your audience value hard work, fairness, equality? Think about concepts that matter to your audience. And then when you go to write, you can play off of those to strengthen your own pathos appeals or your own personal ethos to your audience, or your logical arguments, which we'll look at next. On the second page of the worksheet, once you've really done some work to figure out what it is that your audience feels, values, and believes in, you're going to go and think about logos, which is one of the 3 rhetorical appeals that you'll want to use in your argument. So when we think about logos, you want to ask yourself, where does my audience currently stand on this issue? And where do I want them to be at the end of my argument? What is it that I'm trying to convince them? And then your job in the writing is to fill in that middle, to get them from where you know they started to where you want them to end up. There's an example on the worksheet that I think can help walk you through this. If you know, for example, that your audience values the sense of individual hard work, and that's something that you already know about them, and what you want them to do is, in the end, to support the top 10% rule, then one thing you could do is try to make that link clear to them between hard work and the top 10% rule. And you would know, if you wanted to make that logical appeal, that you would need to do some writing and construct some sentences that convince your audience that the people who qualify for college under the top 10% rule are hard workers. And that way, what you're going to end up doing is taking your audience from something that they already believe to showing them how that thing actually leads them logically to embrace your concept. Once you've done a couple examples of logos, taking them from things that you know from your research that they already think and feel to where you want them to end up, you want to think about pathos, and that's on the next sheet of the worksheet. Again, pathos, if you'll remember from earlier in the semester, pathos is the emotional appeals, the sort of values and the feelings that your audience already has. And you want to tap into those when you make your argument. Again, we could return to this idea of hard work. If you know that your audience really values hard work, then that example that we just looked at would be an example actually of pathos, that you're celebrating this value of the hardworking young students who might get into college through the top 10% rule. And again, playing up that idea of hard work, that'll stir a feeling in your audience that you know is there to be stirred. Again, I'm going to remind you, this is where your research is important. If you try to stir up a feeling in your audience or a value or some sort of emotion that they really just don't have, then your work in trying to cultivate that emotion won't be very successful. So this is where you want to really understand your audience and understand, for example, to take a completely different example, if your audience is very caught up with the idea of equality, and you want to convince your audience that the top 10% rule is a terrible idea and that we should get rid of it, then what you might do is play up this sense of equality and say, look, you care about fairness, you care about equality, well, I'm going to associate the top 10% rule with inequality and unfairness. That sort of rhetoric will be more effective at persuading them that this rule that you disapprove of and that you're trying to argue against is something that's also against their own interests in fairness and equality. So again, these kinds of verbal associations can be rhetorical strategies you can make in your writing to connect specifically with the audience's feelings and beliefs and values. The last one I want to talk about, which is also on that final page of the worksheet, is ethos. And again, ethos is your own credibility to the audience. So you want to make sure that all these things that you're saying and all this hard work that you're doing, that all of this is something the audience meets with respect and identification, and that your audience trusts you as a source of rhetoric. So again, let's think back to the college student example. If you are speaking as high school students and you're speaking to a group of college students, then you might ask yourself, there are some differences between us, namely age would be a slight difference, but what do we have in common? How could I show them through a sentence or a word choice or an image that I might use that I get their situation, that I understand where they're at, and that they can relate to me? You also certainly have a lot in common with them. They've been in your shoes very recently. You might remind them how they felt when they were in high school. And you might also say something that shows that you understand what it's like to be a college student. Maybe you have a sibling who's a college student. You could use that. And maybe it's just vocabulary that you use. If you bring UT into it, that sort of creates a bond between you and the UT students. So again, different audiences will require different techniques, but you want to ask yourself, who is this audience? What kinds of experiences have they had? What kind of feelings and emotions do they have? And how can I use my word choices, my sentences, every little bit of rhetoric that I put down on this paper to show them that I connect to them and that I understand how they feel, and to bring them through your paper to the ultimate argument that you want to make. So good luck with your writing, and thanks for watching.